"Ma'am, step away from the radio, now." The voice cracked through the hot desert air like a command that expected obedience, not conversation. Two military police officers stood at the edge of the runway, their shadows stretching long across the concrete as the roar of distant fighter jets rolled through the sky. The woman standing beside the portable communications unit didn't move. Her posture was calm, almost still, like someone who had already measured the weight of the moment. She looked ordinary: plain jacket, faded jeans, a small duffel bag resting by her feet. Nothing about her suggested she belonged anywhere near a restricted military runway where F-16s were circling overhead. The senior officer stepped closer, jaw tight, hand resting on his belt as if authority itself lived there. "This area is restricted. I don't know how you got past the gate, but you're not authorized to touch military communications." Around them, the wind carried the smell of jet fuel and desert dust. Several ground crew members paused in the distance, sensing tension building in a place where mistakes could echo in the sky. The woman slowly lifted her eyes toward the horizon, listening, not to the officer, but to the faint, strained voices crackling through the headset on the radio table. A pilot's voice cut through the static. "Control, we've got a systems failure. Navigation's not responding." The officer reached forward to pull the headset away. "That's enough. You're done here." The woman's voice finally broke the silence, steady and low. "If you disconnect that radio right now," she said, "those pilots may not make it back." The officer let out a short laugh, the kind people give when they believe they're in complete control. "And you're what exactly? Air traffic control?" She met his gaze without flinching. For a brief moment, something in her eyes made him hesitate, like he was looking at someone who understood the sky in a way he didn't. Before this story goes any further, take a second to subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard. The officer shook off the feeling and tightened his voice. "Ma'am, step away from the equipment." But high above them, two F-16 fighters were circling with a growing problem, and the only person on the ground who seemed to understand what was happening was the quiet woman they were trying to remove. The runway hummed with tension, the kind that builds when authority and truth are about to collide. And in the seconds that followed, one simple voice over a radio would begin to change everything. Chapter 1. The desert air shimmered above the runway like a living thing. Heat waves danced across the concrete, bending the shapes of the fighter jets parked along the tarmac. It was the kind of afternoon where every sound felt louder. The metallic clank of tools, the distant growl of engines, the rhythmic wind dragging sand across the ground. Most people avoided the outer edge of the runway, where the portable communications table had been set up temporarily during the training exercise. But she stood there quietly, listening. The woman had arrived almost an hour earlier, walking with the steady pace of someone who didn't need to rush. Her presence barely caught attention at first. In a place filled with uniforms and official vehicles, a civilian woman with a duffel bag simply didn't fit the pattern. But people often overlook what they don't expect to understand. She had leaned against the metal railing for a long time, watching the sky. Two F-16s had lifted off earlier, slicing through the clouds with the smooth precision of machines designed for absolute control. Most spectators saw speed and power when they watched fighter jets. She saw something else entirely, the delicate balance between technology and instinct. The senior military police officer, Sergeant Daniel Rourke, first noticed her when a technician pointed toward the communications table. "She's been standing there for 20 minutes, the technician said quietly. Rourke followed the direction with his eyes. The woman had moved closer to the equipment, her head tilted slightly as if she were listening to something distant. There was nothing aggressive about her stance, but in a place like this, being in the wrong location was enough. Rourke walked over with the confident stride of someone used to enforcing rules. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "this area is restricted." She turned toward him slowly. Up close, she looked even more ordinary than he expected. Early 40s, maybe. Sun-touched skin, calm eyes, no visible identification badge. "I know," she replied softly. Rourke crossed his arms. "Then you also know you shouldn't be here." She glanced back toward the sky. The distant hum of jet engines vibrated through the air. "They're running a low-altitude systems drill today," she said. Rourke frowned slightly. "That information isn't public." She didn't respond right away. Instead, her attention shifted toward the radio console sitting on the folding table. The speakers crackled faintly. Rourke followed her gaze. That equipment is for authorized personnel only. A younger officer standing behind him smirked slightly, assuming the situation was simple. Civilians wandered into restricted zones sometimes. Usually they apologized and left. But the woman didn't apologize. Instead, she asked a quiet question. How long have those pilots been reporting navigation delays? The younger officer laughed softly. Ma'am, you've been watching too many movies. But Rourke didn't laugh. Something about the way she asked the question felt different. Not curious, certain. Before he could answer, the radio suddenly crackled louder. A voice cut through the static. Control, this is Falcon 2. We're getting intermittent response from the guidance system. The technician standing nearby looked toward the radio with concern. Rourke stepped forward quickly, reaching to adjust the volume. The woman watched silently. Another voice followed, sharper this time. Falcon 1 to Control, confirm radar relay. The technician responded into the microphone, trying to keep the tone calm, but the woman's eyes narrowed slightly. She had heard that tone before. Pilots didn't use voices like that unless something was beginning to go wrong. Rourke turned back toward her, now more irritated than curious. Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one last time to step away. For a brief second, she looked like she might leave. Her hand rested lightly on the edge of the radio table. The wind lifted a strand of hair across her face. They're not hearing the relay properly, she said quietly. The younger officer sighed loudly. Here we go. Rourke gestured toward the exit gate. You need to go. She hesitated, then slowly removed her hand from the table. But high above the desert, the two F-16s continued circling, their pilots trying to troubleshoot a system that wasn't responding the way it should. On the ground, the tension remained subtle, almost invisible. Yet something about the quiet woman lingered in Rourke's mind even as she stepped back from the equipment. Because sometimes the people who understand the sky the most are the ones no one thinks to listen to.
10 minutes later, the situation in the sky had changed. What had started as a minor systems delay was slowly turning into something far more complicated. Inside the cockpit of Falcon 1, warning lights blinked across the instrument panel like restless fireflies. The pilot's breathing remained steady, but his hands moved with the quick efficiency of someone who understood how little room fighter jets leave for mistakes. Falcon 2, confirm your nav response, he said over the channel. The reply came back with tension woven into the words. Still lagging, getting partial signal, not stable on the ground. Technicians gathered around the communications console. Rourke watched from a few feet away, arms crossed. The earlier encounter with the civilian woman had faded from his mind as the real priority became the aircraft overhead. The technician holding the microphone spoke carefully. Falcon 1. Control confirms intermittent relay. Adjust to manual alignment and stand by. Static answered back. The signal flickered, cutting in and out like a failing heartbeat. One of the engineers shook his head quietly. That shouldn't be happening. Rourke looked toward the sky where the tiny silhouettes of the two jets curved against the horizon. Fighter pilots trained for pressure, but technology was supposed to support them, not complicate things at altitude. And yet the radio system on the ground was suddenly behaving unpredictably. A gust of wind swept across the runway, carrying dust and the distant echo of jet engines. The technicians began adjusting cables, checking connections, trying to stabilize the signal, but the interference continued. Then, unexpectedly, a familiar calm voice spoke from behind them. The relay antenna is bouncing the signal off the southern ridge. Everyone turned. The woman was standing a few steps away again. She hadn't left the area after all. Rourke's expression hardened immediately. I told you to leave. She nodded slightly, acknowledging the command without moving. I heard the signal break. The younger officer groaned under his breath. This lady again. But the woman's attention remained fixed on the radio equipment. Your antenna alignment is reflecting the transmission off the terrain. That's why they're hearing delays. The technician frowned. Ma'am, this system was calibrated this morning. She didn't argue. She simply pointed toward the horizon where a line of low mountains cut across the desert. Your signal is hitting that ridge before reaching the aircraft. For a moment, no one responded. The explanation sounded oddly specific for someone who supposedly didn't belong there. Rourke stepped forward again, patience thinning. That's enough. The woman finally turned to face him fully. Her expression remained calm, but there was something stronger beneath it now, like a quiet certainty that refused to be shaken by authority alone. Sergeant, she said softly. The use of his rank caught him off guard. If the relay drops completely, those pilots will lose guidance during descent. The technician suddenly looked at the antenna monitor again. The signal graph flickered violently. She might be right about the bounce. Rourke's jaw tightened. Authority was built on control, and control meant trusting the system that was already in place. Accepting advice from an unidentified civilian standing near restricted equipment felt like admitting weakness. Ma'am, he said firmly, you are interfering with an active military operation. Her voice didn't rise. I'm trying to prevent an accident. The radio suddenly burst to life again. Control, Falcon 2. We've lost stable navigation feed. The words hung in the air like a warning bell. The technician looked toward Rourke uncertainly. The officer hesitated just long enough for doubt to slip into the moment. And then the woman took one step closer to the radio table. Her hand hovered near the headset, but she didn't touch it yet. Because even in a moment like this, she understood something important. Respect isn't taken, it's revealed. And the next voice those pilots heard over the radio would change the entire atmosphere on that runway forever.